Noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from California seeks recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved. Mr. McClintock.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. McClintock, offered by
Without
Mr.
objection,
Schiff.
the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is simple. It would exempt individuals fleeing communist and totalitarian regimes from Section 104. We should exempt people fleeing communist and totalitarian dictatorships from this legislation and allow them to apply for asylum as our laws were intended. The underlying bill would bar individuals who cross the border between ports of entry from seeking asylum. This means individuals would be forced to wait in Mexico to cross the border and be processed. That would make people fleeing communist and totalitarian regimes sitting ducks for the cartels for exploitation, abuse, kidnapping, or murder. We have seen what happens when people are forced to wait in Mexico for too long. Under the Remain in Mexico program, there were over 1,500 publicly reported cases of murder, rape, torture, kidnapping, and other violent assaults against migrants returned under the Remain in Mexico program. In fact, just last month, we saw what happens when vulnerable migrants are put at risk, when migrants in an immigration center in Ciudad Juarez were left to be burned alive. This is not the fate we want for anyone, and we don't want people fleeing totalitarian dictatorships like people fleeing Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua or Russia or China or Vietnam or elsewhere to have to face those kind of dangers. There was a time when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle claimed to oppose communism and totalitarian dictatorships and welcomed people fleeing those horrible regimes. The underlying bill suggests otherwise. I urge my colleagues to join in this amendment so that those fleeing asylum are not put at those fleeing persecution by these communist regimes are not put at additional risk by having to wait for long periods of time in dangerous places before they can lawfully apply for asylum.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Will you yield for the clarifying question?
You can seek your own recognition. I'm going to yield back to the chair.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman seek recognition?
I guess so.
The point of order is withdrawn, and Mr. Gaetz is recognized.
Thank you. I yield to the sponsor. If the sponsor would be willing to engage in a colloquy with me, would you consider the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be a totalitarian dictatorship?
Mr. Gaetz, I give the same answer that Representative Lofgren gave before. These are not new terms of art. These are the terms used in current law. And so we are merely applying current law to protect people, and in particular, in this case, those that are fleeing communist dictatorships. If the gentleman, his objection is that this definition is overbroad.
Oh, no. Mr. Schiff, I'm not objecting. I'm asking you a clarifying question.
If you would yield, if you would respond to my question, which is, if this amendment is narrowed to communist dictatorships, will you support it?
Well, again, Mr. Schiff, I'm just trying to understand what your
amendment says. I guess your answer is no, then, Mr. Gaetz.
Well, that you perhaps assume too much, my
then
friend,
your answer
because
is
yes. I'm asking what you mean by totalitarian dictatorship and just whether the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would qualify. It's just a yes or no question.
Well, I certainly think.
Forgive me for not knowing the list that Ms. Lofgren.
Would you like an answer, Mr. Gaetz? I certainly consider Saudi Arabia to be a dictatorship. Yes, I do.
A totalitarian one?
Mr. Gaetz, my question is, if your problem with this amendment is you think it's
Mr.
overbroad.
Schiff, I'm not stating a problem with the amendment. I am merely asking you what it means.
My question then, Mr. Gaetz, is
what is the difference between a dictatorship and a totalitarian dictatorship?
My question,
since Saudi Arabia is a dictatorship.
There is a difference between totalitarianism and dictatorship.
Well, sure, I'm asking you to explain the differences of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
That's really the question, Mr. Gaetz.
Why can't you just answer whether or not your amendment would apply to them?
Mr. Gaetz, this is just a rhetorical exercise.
It's a serious effort to understand whether or not your amendment applies to the kingdom.
If your question is sincere, which I know assumes too much, but if it is, then will you support the amendment confined to communist dictatorships? Yes or no, Mr. Gaetz?
I'm probably not going to support the amendment either way. That doesn't
well, there you go.
I don't want to know what it means.
Then what about all the rhetoric you constantly espouse about standing up to communism? Here you're saying someone fleeing communism, if they're interdicted between ports, then they will not qualify.
Right,
Doesn't
because
matter what kind of
there is
regime.
a mechanism by which one seeks asylum for those very reasons, and it's not showing up and creating an entire
So this
loophole in
whole
the
thing
asylum
about Saudi
system.
Arabia is just a red herring, right?
I'm
Mr. Gaetz?
just curious to know whether or not you
Well,
consider
I
them qualifying under the
appreciate
bill.
your
And I
curiosity, but
I
would
earned
appreciate
2.5 minutes. And it's just a simple question.
consistency.
You know, Mr.
I
Schiff,
would
people on the
appreciate
border
consistency
don't get to have a
more than
debate like this
curiosity.
like you and I do. It's
I would
not your time,
appreciate
Mr.
it
Schiff. I'm
if you
reclaiming
would
my
stand
time.
up to
Mr.
communist
Gaetz has the time.
the
Mr.
way
Gaetz has
you
the
say
time.
you do.
Mr. Gaetz has the time.
Look, on the border, someone doesn't get to have this joyful little colloquy with you. A Border Patrol agent has to look at someone and assess whether or not they're going to let them in or not. And I'm just, for clarity, even though I'm not going to support your amendment, I'm going to support the bill. In the unlikely event that your amendment were to be adopted, I simply want to know if someone encounters someone from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, whether or not the exception that your amendment affords would allow that or not.
As I said, I'm using the existing definition, Mr. Gaetz. My
So
question
does
to
that
you
definition
is,
include the
my
kingdom or
question
not?
to you is, will
This
you
is
will you
insane.
live
This is
up to
insane.
your
You just have to answer the
anti-communist rhetoric?
question,
Will
Mr.
you
Schiff.
live up to your anti-communist rhetoric, or is it just a lot of talk from you, Mr. Gaetz?
I don't think you have to blow a
I
hole
guess
through the
it's
asylum
just
system to
a lot
oppose
of
communism.
talk. I guess it's just a lot of talk with you. Nothing more than a lot of
It's
empty
all, I just
talk.
want to know if the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is included or excluded. How is this so difficult for you?
Well,
Do you have any compassion for the people who would have to make this assessment on the border? I just want to know.
Would you care for me to read the code section to you?
Gladly.
The existence of a single political party organized on a dictatorial basis with so close an identity between such party and its policies and the government policies of the country in which it exists, and the party and the government constitute an indistinguishable unit, and the forcible suppression of opposition to such party. That is how the code currently defines a totalitarian party
would you define Saudi
and a
Arabia that way or not?
totalitarian dictatorship.
Would you define them that way or not, Adam?
So if you wanted to know, read the code. But the
But would you
question
apply
is
to
not,
them or not?
the
It's your
question is
amendment.
not whether you can read the code. The question is
wrote the
whether you
amendment,
stand
and you
for
can't say
anything,
whether it
Mr.
applies
Gaetz.
to a specific
the question
country.
is, do you
Why does this
stand?
pain you so
do you
much?
stand for anything? Does anything you say mean anything to you?
I merely am seeking
Well,
your
are
own
you
ability
really
to define
so
your own
soft?
amendment.
Are you really so soft on communism now, Mr. Gaetz? I am shocked.
Soft on communism.
So
You're soft on
that
definitions
you would
within
accept,
your own bill.
You would
soft on the
prosecute.
basics of
you
the
would
English
prosecute
language. Soft
and
on the
deny
interpretation
asylum
statute
to someone
mechanisms
fleeing
by which a Border
communism
Patrol agent would have
merely
to apply
because
this.
they won't.
You know what? A
wait
Border
for
Patrol
Mexico
agent
to
isn't going to
be
have this.
Mercifully, the
Mercifully,
gentleman is out of time. Mercifully, the gentleman is out of time. Okay. Woo.
Should we have unanimous consent to
No,
continue?
no, everybody's out of time. Everybody's out of time. Does anyone seek recognition?
Yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this markup, it's about Hunter Biden. It's not about President Trump. I keep hearing my colleagues on the left talk about President Trump and that no one is above the law, and I keep hearing this argument ad infinitum. I guess what they mean is that no one is above the law except for when it comes to President Biden's son, Hunter. And Hunter Biden should not be given special treatment. He defied congressional subpoena and should be treated like others who have done the same, plain and simple. See, Hunter should not be treated with kid gloves. This man is 50 years old, literally. He's a grown-ass man. Congressional Democrats held Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro in contempt of Congress for not complying with congressional subpoenas concerning an investigation to January 6th. Hunter had every right to appear and plead the Fifth, and he chose to defy the subpoena when he instead held a self-serving press conference right at the steps of this building. When Democrats issued subpoenas to Republicans during the House January 6th investigation, President Biden said, and I quote, "I hope that the committee goes after them and holds them accountable criminally," end quote. Okay, all right. Now let's do Hunter, and that's why we're here. Hunter Biden makes arguments of passion to excuse his behavior. His best defense is oftentimes to make the public feel sorry for him. That's right, we should feel badly for him because he personally enriched himself because of his last name. And again, the left wants us to treat him with kid gloves and this man is 50 years old? Please. Your daddy's saving at this point. It ain't going to work here anymore. He should not be given special treatment because he thinks he's an American prince. And I don't mean Purple Rain. A witness does not get to decide his preferred method of appearing before the committee. The committee that subpoenaed the witness does. That's how this place works. House committees are not in the business of letting witnesses dictate to us the type of depositions or hearings that they want to have. This is not a kangaroo court like President Trump is seeing in the New York trial. It's up to the committees to determine the best methods that will further their investigation, and rather that be through deposition, transcribed interview, or public hearing. This is our job to do that, and Hunter Biden does not get to dictate that to us. And with that, I yield back the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The gentleman will yield.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding.